All right, so slide number 21. As we talk about the last layer of protection that exists in the brain that we'll talk about is the blood-brain barrier. And the blood-brain barrier is a group of capillaries that exists that make things very, very difficult to make their way out of the bloodstream and into the central nervous system. Now serves a huge protective function. Large molecules, and specifically water-soluble molecules, are going to have a very, very difficult time getting out of these capillaries and into the brain itself. So the blood-brain barrier is going to be very protective as far as that is concerned. One thing that is interesting about it is because of brain tissue and its high-fat composition, is that the blood-brain barrier will not be able to exclude or filter out or stop the passage of lipid-soluble products. So things that are very, very high in fat or cholesterol-based in nature, they're going to be able to pass across the blood-brain barrier fairly easily. So certain types of hormones will diffuse very, very easily, which is good. There are imbalances associated with the central nervous system as well. Traumatic brain injury, which is something that has come to the forefront, especially with the injuries that have been involved with the rise in insurgency in the areas where America is involved in foreign action right now. So Iraq and Afghanistan, the incidence of traumatic brain injury due to bombings that have occurred on vehicles has risen sharply, and so this is a very hot area of research right now. There are concussions and contusions that can result in traumatic brain injury. Concussions being less serious than contusions, though concussions in their own right can be very serious. But the most serious injury occurs whenever there are hemorrhages. And this is going to be the letting of blood. Now remember, I told you that blood itself is going to be very caustic. It's going to be very harmful to neurons and to brain tissue on the whole. So it's important that we protect our brains from having a tremendous amount of blood flowing through them. Whenever a blood vessel ruptures inside of the brain, it results in what is known as a hemorrhage. And that hemorrhage will begin to destroy brain tissue. Now there are two types of hemorrhages that can be equally as deadly, even though it's not due to a rupture of a blood vessel inside of brain tissue. And those are going to be things like subdural hemorrhages and submeningeal hemorrhages. So you have subarachnoid hemorrhages, you have subdural hemorrhages that can exist. There are also certain types of cardiovascular issues that will lead to these imbalances. Ischemic episodes that are associated with loss of blood can include something like a transient ischemic episode, which are kind of like mini strokes that an individual will occur due to a lack of blood flow going through a specific area. And then there are the degenerative processes, things like Alzheimer's and Parkinsonism and Huntington's disease. Parkinsonism, once again, is going to be the result of the destruction of the cells in the substantia nigra responsible for dopamine. Alzheimer's is going to be associated with the acetylcholine system, and it's not only going to be associated with that, but the presence of plaques and the buildup of what we refer to as neurofibrillary tangles. So a huge amount of tangling that will occur among the cells inside of the central nervous system, both glia and neurons. The spinal cord. As we talk about the anatomy of the spinal cord, you'll remember there is a gray and white component to it as well. As far as the gray matter is concerned, they're arranged in horns. And remember, there's a lateral aspect, there is a dorsal, which is located towards the back, a dorsal horn, and then there is a more, there is towards the front of the body, or an anterior portion, that is referred to as the ventral horn of gray matter. And the gray matter is going to be in the middle of the spinal cord, kind of the opposite of what we see with the central nervous system in the form of the brain. So in the brain, what we see in the cerebrum or the cerebral cortex is gray matter with white matter in the middle. Same way for the cerebellum. What we see with the spinal cord is gray matter in the middle, white matter on the outside. There are roots that are associated with the spinal cord, specifically the dorsal and ventral roots. The ventral roots located towards the front of the body, and they are going to be important as far as motor output is concerned. So, sensory input comes in through the dorsal portion, and it leaves the signal actually leaves the central nervous system via the ventral root. Now, there are bulges that are associated, if you remember that, bulges or large knots that are associated with the dorsal portion of the spinal cord, and those are referred to as ganglion, and those are cell bodies that are associated with the spinal cord. So, what we have is the dorsal root ganglion that are part of the sensory input of this system. Remember, white matter is arranged into columns, and once again there are three parts or portions to it. There's a dorsal component, there is a ventral component, so dorsal columns, ventral columns, and lateral columns. There are specific pathways that are referenced as far as the central nervous system is concerned, and there are first, second, and third order ascending portions to the pathway. That's not going to be important as far as the exam is concerned, just wanted to mention it to you. As far as the ascending pathways are concerned, there are specific tracks, and you'll find these inside of the book. Make sure you get a chance to look over those. But they are the dorsal column, medial and meniscal. There's an anterolateral and a spinocerebellar tract that is associated with ascending pathways. So from lower structures to higher structures in the brain. Descending pathways are going to be direct and indirect. And the direct pathway is called the pyramidal pathway, and then there is the extrapyramidal. I believe I misspelled that on your notes. The extrapyramidal or indirect descending pathway. As far as the spinal cord is concerned, damage to the spinal cord is going to lead to paralysis or paresthesias. So paralysis can be a flaccid form of paralysis, or it can be a spastic form of paralysis. As far as transection or the severing of the spinal cord, paralysis that is associated with paraplegia, which is going to be the loss of function of the legs, is going to be associated with damage to the thoracic and lumbar region. Damage to the cervical region will lead to quadriplegia. As far as the spinal cord is concerned, there are three disorders I want you to know. One is polio. Make sure you read over that. The second is going to be ALS, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And the last is spina bifida. Spina bifida is going to be associated with a lack of fusing of the spinal cord, specifically at more inferior regions. So, that's what I need you to know for the exam. Hope you all do well. Be prepared for it, and I'll see you when I get back.